Fantastic. And we'll go to this. So can everyone see the slides? I think if I go back here. Yeah, okay, cool. I quite like this with the Google Meet because when I share the slide, I can actually come back to the talk and talk to you about it. So hi, I'm Nabil. I'm a senior bioinformatician here at CGPS at the University of Oxford. I've done a lot of software development for certain tools and written databases that a lot of people use. And I do a lot of science looking at population genetics of Salmonella and E. coli as my main focus. But I've also done, as everyone did, like a ton of COVID stuff during the COVID pandemic. So today we're going to be talking about Docker and containerization and how it applies to bioinformatics. I don't know how familiar people are with everything, so I've written my slides to basically start at the beginning. Who knows what Docker is? Like, who's used Docker? You can just react with the buttons or put something in the chat, or if you want. If no one says anything, I'm assuming Angela's used Docker. Vern's used Docker. That's it. So no one else has used Docker. Do people know what containerization is as a concept?
I don't think so. The people from our lab.
Good. And I'm guessing no one's actually written a Dockerfile and deployed it. No. Okay, cool. Great. Because I've got that's basically the slide, so I don't have to skip anything. I'll have to start right at the beginning. Okay, so let's go right to the beginning. So in general, when we're doing bioinformatics, when we're doing any data analysis, we want to have our workflow, and we want to deal with our results in such a way that it's reproducible from the primary data. So we start in our line of work in genomics. In other disciplines of bioinformatics, you might be dealing with something different, but you will start off with some sort of primary data, imaging data, sequencing data, whatever it is, and you'll have some contextual data of how that data was collected, so where and when and so on. What you will do is you will then have this massive data and you'll be trying to do analysis on it and come up with some sort of meaningful inference to tell people to do about it. And so what you'll do is you'll have like software or a process that will help you orchestrate like a bunch of different analyses together, and you'll have a bunch of different software that are doing the analysis. And you'll manipulate that data, you'll make other files, you'll then summarize it using visualization or some statistics or whatever you'll be doing. Now, you want to make this reproducible because you want to be able to describe how you got to that point, and you want potentially to make a process where you can repeat it over and over again, and you want to explain to people how you did it. So usually in our area, we pick for this question of, say, how do you design your workflows? The standard that people tend towards is to use workflow languages like SnakeMake or Nextflow. You can just use a really, really ugly bash script if you really want to. I'd rather you didn't. Or you can write like a monolithic Python script or something like that. But usually people are gravitating towards SnakeMake and Nextflow as workflow languages where you specify the actual process, so the glue, so this pipeline, this program, take the output from this program, put it into the next program, put it into the next program, and so on. And then what you're stitching together is a bunch of analysis software. So these are different tools that produce different outputs, and you will install them or deliver them to your system with different ways of managing those packages. One of those is Conda. Have a look at Conda if you don't know anything about it. Obviously, there's system level or OS specific package managers like apt or yum or brew for Mac OS X, or I don't know what you do for Windows. Who does? Who knows? The App Store, Microsoft App Store, I don't know. But we're going to be talking about Docker and Singularity because they pertain to containerization. Usually you pick one. you tend not to mix and match. You don't pick Singularity and then don't have a Singularity container that calls Docker or some weird stuff like that. You usually pick one and you just stick with it. Right. So what is a container? What is it for? So a container is an approach that's used in software development and deployment. It has a range of different applications in terms of people use it primarily for testing and continuous integration. People use it to deploy web applications. People use it to sort of package up very fragile applications. And people use it for pipelines where there's lots and lots of different dependencies. The idea of it is like if you've ever had someone come to you and say, hey, I tried out your program and it doesn't work. It works. And then you turn around and say, oh, but it works on my computer. I don't know why it's not working for you. So the idea of containerization is that you don't just give the software, you give the environment in which the software was installed and developed. So you can basically give them your computer. Inside it is not only is it the source code or the applications or the binaries or the databases, but it's also like the system level environment as well. So it's exactly as you, in quotes, but exactly as you developed it. You can deploy it, and you can deploy it in a range of different places all at the same time. So hopefully you can see how that helps with, say, if you're trying to run like a web application with across a bunch of different servers all over the world, or you have something that's really brittle, that's really fiddly to install. So you make a environment where it's installed and you can just give that to people and so on. Hopefully you can see the sort of value of doing that. Because it's sort of like a black box where it's enclosed inside it, it doesn't work very well with graphical or GUI applications, not web applications, that's different, but actual like, so games don't work very well in Docker containers, like that doesn't make sense, or like the Photoshop wouldn't make sense in a container. And then things that tend to use heavy use of the file system because it's sort of, it's a contained thing. It doesn't really interact with the host file system very much. So those applications, it tends not to be a good idea. You'll hear containerization and virtualization. These are two different ideas. You might have encountered like a virtual server. So if you've used an AWS, like Amazon server, or you've used VMware, or you've used Boot Camp on your Mac, or something like that, those are virtual machines. So what those are, they're sort of the similar thing in that you're running like a different system on your own system. But the virtual machine has like the applications and the operating system, and then there's some sort of layer that's the hypervisor that's converting that so that it can run on the infrastructure that you have, so your computer or your server or whatever. The containerization things are a bit different. They don't have the operating system. They just have this sort of image, this box that has the application in it, and there's this interface layer, Docker or whatever in this case, that's talking to the host operating system and then to the infrastructure. So the architecture is a little bit different. Generally, in practice, what this means is that the containers are like much lighter and smaller and less complicated than, say, like a virtualization of an entire operating system. You will find that there are two major platforms for containers. One is called Docker, one is called Singularity. Docker, as I said, is mainly for software development and deployment. That's what it's designed for. There's a thing called the Docker daemon. That's sort of like a root level sort of background process that runs, that handles everything for you. The user interface for Docker is much easier. It's been around for a lot longer, and using things like Docker Desktop is very nice to know what it's actually doing. But it really, really works well if you have your own virtual machine, your own server, your own laptop, where you can kind of control as an administrator. Docker works really nice. Singularity is sort of a newer platform that's come out in the last few years. It's specifically designed for high performance computing. So that's when you're on a compute cluster with a scheduler, like a Slurm cluster or something like that. It does work on your own machine, but it's sort of more tailored towards running on an HPC. One of the really nice things is that Singularity allows you to convert your Docker image into a Singularity image. So what that means is you make a Docker image on your own computer, and then when you go to your HPC, you can actually just build from that Docker image a Singularity image. You can deploy the same Docker image, although it's going to be slightly different, to run on your HPC. So, some definitions really quick. So I will say Docker image. Now the image is like the archive containing all the data that needs to run to the application. So all of the application and then the essential information around of your system that allows it to run. When you run an image, it creates a container. Now the container is just an instance of that image that's running. So it's like the process. It's just an instantiation of that the process from that image. You can run multiple containers from a single image. The image is run from your host machine, so that's usually the thing you're working on directly. And yeah, you can have many containers running from the same image. So okay, really quick background information of terms and concepts you need to know. We're up to here in the agenda, which is how do you actually run Docker? So now it's going to get more fun. So again, if you haven't had a look at the chat, try out the links, get the data, install Docker. If you've hopefully you've been doing that while I've been talking or something like that. And so you can now actually interact and try this out yourself. So the first thing is, installing Docker. If you don't know, download it for your OS and follow the prompts. That's basically it. How do you run Docker? Okay, so you can try this out. To run a container, all you need to do is specify the image name, and Docker will pull it from Docker Hub and begin running it. So the command is literally just Docker run, then the name of the image. So if you ran something like Docker run hello world, as depicted there, what would it output? And try it yourself. But what it does is it runs, you'll get this. So Docker run hello world, it'll say hello from Docker. This message shows that your installation appears to be working correctly. Basically, that's it. It's just a simple test thing. If you just run Docker world, you'll notice that and you don't have the image, you'll notice that it actually it says something on pulling the container, and you go, okay, well, where's it coming from? Because it's not on your system, it's coming from but it comes from somewhere. Well, it comes from Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a website. It's called hub.docker.com. And that's like a registry that has a bunch of images. It's like a repository for a bunch of images. It's mostly free, I think. And you can sign up and you can put your own images up there as sort of like GitHub. You can have a repository of your own images and share it with your friends, if you have any friends. Now, most of the time, if you're looking for an image, there might actually be one already there. And that's, so if you go to hub.docker.com, can you find me a Docker container for Collaborate published by the Staffy group? Have a go at that. You can just do that because that's just on the web page. You can just look that up. So if you go to Docker Hub and try and do that now. While you do that, I will also, because I forgot to add it to the slides, but if you want another repository that has images for bioinformatics, you can use biocontainers. Biocontainers is very, very good. Anything in Conda, so Bioconda, Varun, Ace, gold stuff for Varun. Anyone else jump in there really quick? If you have anything on Conda, they go and they make Docker images for them on biocontainers. So you don't need to make a container for Blast or Shovel or Spades or whatever. It might just be on biocontainers already. So that's another one you can look at as a resource. No, Angela, that's the wrong one. That's the wrong author. Who's that? NanoZoo. What's NanoZoo? Oh, interesting. So Nanazu has a bunch of software as well from OSS. So that's fun, but that's not quite the one I was looking for. So no, the one I was looking for was this one. Should look like this. Staff B/collaborate. That's the correct one I was asking for. But it doesn't matter. I mean, you should use the staff B one if you're following along, because that's the one I've tested this on. I don't know what the NanoZoo one would do if you did what I'm going to do next. Okay, so next thing. Let's try and pull it. Try pulling it. If you have Docker installed, you should be able to just do this. Docker pull staff B/collaborate. You'll notice the syntax is kind of similar to GitHub, where it's like username or account name / repository name. So if you're on OS X, like Mac, if you're using like an M1 Silicon blah, 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 you need to specify the platform as using that flag that's there in the text. Otherwise, it will say, it will try to pull a container and see if it works on your architecture, which is ARM, and it'll say, oh, this isn't an ARM, I can't do it. So you just tell it, no, don't worry, mate. It's Linux. Just it's a 64. it's a you know, it's x86 64-bit. Don't worry about it, and it'll be fine. If you're on Linux, or God forbid, if you're on Windows, you'll be fine if you just do this as Docker pull staff B/collaborate. So if you do it, and you'll get this thing, it'll download it. It might take like a minute to fetch. And it'll say something like this: downloading latest, using default tag latest, and it'll say pull complete by the end of it. So who's following along? Who's actually doing this, able to do this as I'm talking? Angela, yeah. Vroom, just doing, okay, cool, that's good. All right, let's try and run the container we've pulled, yeah? So Docker run staff B/collaborate, what we did before, but it's run now instead of pull, and then give the name of the tool, like collaborate. And it will behave like as if you've just run, collaborate like in Conda, or you installed it yourself somewhere else. It'll behave the same way, which is it just spits out the usage back to you. So that's fun. If you've given that a go, we're going to actually now try and run some data through it. So if you don't have any data, there's a link in the chat of a FASTA file. That's just the clipsYellow I had lying around. And we're going to run it on, we're going to run collaborate on this. So try and run this command. It's docker run --rm. So rm, we'll explain what rm does. It just removes the container after it's run. So remember, every time you run an image, you spin up the container. The container actually sits there if you don't delete it. It's sort of expecting you to start it again, because it's sort of thinking it's like a service that you're going to start and stop. So so you can wind up with like a whole bunch of containers lying around that of like dead jobs you've run. So rm just gets rid of it after it's completed. If you're on OS X, you need the platform. V specifies the volume. Now this is tricky. What you're doing is the image is different. The content of the image, the container, is not your machine. It doesn't know anything about your system, and that's by design. That the whole point is that it's supposed to be a black box container. So you have to sort of expose part of your host system to it and bind it to a certain location in the container, and that's what the -v does. So pwd is just like, give me is this the working direct, like the current directory, and I'm binding it to /data in the container, and you'll see in the command what that means. So then I run the image, and then I've got collaborate -a. That's the flag for collaborate to give the assembly. So I give it /data now. So it's not the, and it has to be it's not the path of the host system. It's the path as where the file would be in the container. So So that for me, because I downloaded the file to my whatever directory I was in, that would be fine. You could use an absolute path to somewhere else. So you could do /user /home/downloads, or it could be /var/ whatever you want. And then you sort of mount that volume to a location in the container, and that's how you transfer files in and out of the image. Otherwise, they will sort of just be in the image, in the container. Sorry, it'll be in the container after you've run it, and you won't be able to get it out. It'll just run. So you give it the path, you give it an output path. Cleverate wants to have an output path, so you have to tell it somewhere. So I just say /data/output test. It'll actually make a directory in my current working directory called output test, and you have to give it a preset. So it's like Klebsiella pneumoniae species complex. That's what KPSC means. So you run that, and then it's like it will spit something out to stand it out, and hopefully you'll see the sequence type. Can everyone see the sequence type? I've been talking for a bit, so you should have done this while I'm talking. But if you have the genome that I gave you, the sequence type should be ST512. If you manage to do that, just give me a reaction if you're doing it, or how you're doing. I'll post in the chat. Okay. So thumbs up. I'm assuming you've got it. You've done it. Angela, did you get it done? And Angela's stuck. Okay. You don't need the slashes. The slashes are just like to break it up over multiple lines. So you can just have it as one line. We can come back to this at the end for questions. So this is an explanation of what the command is doing. I was basically talking you through this as we went along, but here it is for reference if you want to come back to it later. All right, now this is also for reference. You've got the slides in the chat, and so you can keep this for later and refer back to it. These are all of the different commands. Docker has many commands. These are some of the more common ones that you might need. We've already done run. But stuff like ps lists all the running containers, ps-a lists all the running and stop containers. There's things like starting and stopping. Usually if you're running bioinformatics this way, you won't restart it. But let's say you had a web server, you would start and restart it like that with those commands. Remove a container if you need to clean up after yourself at the end. How to list the images, creating volumes. So maybe you want to have a persistent volume that you can attach to a range of different containers as you're going along, and so on. So you can have a look at those later. And now we are down to how do you write a Docker file. Having done a very quick run through of how to actually run a Docker image, we're going to make our own. Okay, so first thing is that a Docker file, it's just a text file. It's literally just a text file that is called Dockerfile. Right, so it's nothing special. So in like the current working directory, or like make a folder of whatever and go into it, just make a text file called Dockerfile, capital D. And in that Dockerfile, you can add text like this. If you have the slides downloaded, you can just copy out of the slides if you want, rather than having to hand type all this stuff. So, and then you can, once you have all these instructions, which I'll explain what these instructions mean in a moment, you can build it with Docker build -t, which is the tag. So that's like the name of the image. If you don't give it the -t, it will give like a UUID, like a sort of hash code. So it'll be unique, but it'll be stupidly long. So that's kind of annoying. So always try to name the image something. The dot, so the dot is like the path to the location where the Docker file is. So if I'm running out of my current directory, I can just say dot, but I could say like, my program /something, and just give a path and it'll be fine. And again, because I'm on OS X, I've got to give the platform thingy-mabob, but if you're on other operating system, you don't have to add that. So if you do that, it'll build, and then you can run it. Because I called it my example, I can run it like we did before. Like I can run my example and then whatever thing within the container, whatever command I want to execute within the container, which is minimap2 in this case. So you can do it that way. So let's look at this example Dockerfile on the left. So there's this thing called from. From is like a base image. And so this is one produced by a bunch of people that has mini conda. Basically, like the image is just a blank mini conda, which is great because then what you can do is you can just install stuff via conda. Like you don't have to install conda, it's already in the image. You can just install software to conda inside the image. So I set the working dir as /app for some reason. I wanted SAM tools. I'll just show this example of like, apt-get. If you use the Debian, like apt-get install -y SAM tools. Yeah, nothing crazy. So I've installed SAM tools with this. And then I've used conda to install minimap2 and BCF tools as well. And then clean up my conda directory because why not? It reduces the image size. It's good practice to just be tidy. And then every time that you run the command, the container, I wanted to just give a bash shell, like show whatever, to just command a bash. It can be anything. You could actually have it like the actual Collaborate example, I think, has it running Collaborate by default. So you don't have to say staffb/collaborate. You can just say staffb/collaborate and it'll just run Collaborate. So this will look like a bash script. Like this is just a command that you would do anyway, right? You would do apt-get install, you would do a conda install, you do conda clean. The thing at the beginning of each line is just specific instructions for Docker to run. So from is a Docker specific thing, run from the space image, workdir, run. Like run is just like as you would in any shell, just write something. There's more commands and variables you can feed into your Dockerfile, which we'll go over into a sec. Here they are. I won't explain all of these, but there's a bunch. We've touched on run, we've touched on command, we've touched on workdir. But there's stuff like copy. So you can copy files from your host system on into your image. So you don't have to like install. You could just be like, oh, just copy this Python script. So it's like copy this Python script from my system into the image. Yep, done. You can set environmental parameters with the env. That's quite useful. Usually you don't have to worry too much about user, but maybe if you're doing something, you might want to specify the user that's actually running. Also, when someone runs the image, what user are they supposed to run as? Labels are nice because you can add metadata to your image, so when someone inspects it, they can learn a bit more about it. And there's a few more in there, like expose, which is like ports, which I won't cover why you need the port, why you want to expose ports. But if you know anything about web services or like database processes, you'll know like, yeah, this is useful to export ports. Okie dokie. So here is a more enhanced version of that example that I showed you with more of those examples worked in, just to give you an idea of what it's like. Like have a look at copy. That's the copy example I was talking about. So it's copying from like, my local, from the current working directory I'm in, it's in /scripts, and then it's putting it into the image part of /app/scripts. Things like that as an example of env and so on. This is a more elaborate one that I wrote. Okay, it's messy, but it will give you like how bonkers some of this can be. So this is like, this has a bunch of different things in here, and I'm not expecting you to get it, but it's like, it's actually compiling some code as well as installing software. So the first part of it is like, it's using Python 2. So the base image is one like a Python. It's like a base image you can get that just has Python 3.11 inside it, and I think it's running on a Debian bookworm. That's what the bookworm part means. So that's like an image to, I called it compile image from blah 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 as compile image. That's like I've called it compile image, and what it does is it installs a bunch of system utilities for compiling code, like make and libzid and so on. And what I do is I fetch some source code, I compile it, I get executables, I create executables, and then that's basically what that compile image does. Then on the third panel, I make a fresh image that's called run image. And that is actually that's actually using the Mamba, micro Mamba as a base image. So that's an image that just has micro Mamba built into it. And then what I do is I install a bunch of software that I want for using micro Mamba. And I copy. The interesting thing is the copy thing. So not only can you copy from your host machine, you can copy from previously compiled images. So it says copy from equals compile image opt hapg to this one, or like /opt hapg. What have I done there? So I compiled the code that I wanted and created some binaries in one image. And I've copied just those binaries because I don't need, like, I've got the binary now. I don't need make anymore. I don't need to have my image filled with all of this crap to compile binaries. I've done that. I just copied the final binaries across into this image alongside all of the other software that I've installed with Micro Mamba. So that makes it smaller and more easy to deploy. And then I'm making a whole bunch of symlinks that the software needs. It needs things in certain places. So I've got a whole bunch of symlinks there. And then I'm copying a bunch of, I have to hack like the Python file to have Python 3 in the right place. It's got it hard coded to be user local bin, and I just need it to be wherever the actual Python 3 is for the system. So that's what the sed command that does. I chmod it so that it's executable, all this stuff. So I'm doing all of this stuff to get this to work. And there's a lot of different, you can get pretty nutty in terms of what you can do inside your Docker files. So how do you build a Docker file? So you've written the Docker file, you want to build it. So you save the Docker file to an empty folder, and then you can navigate to it, or you can just give the path and you go Docker build, give it a target. So that's the -t, this target. That's the long form is -- the target. It's called test. Progress is plain. That helps with giving more debugging information when you run it. Oh no, target is the image name from the Docker. So like where I had it as compile image or runtime image, that's the target. It's that specific image inside the Docker file. And tag is the name that it's actually going to be called that you can invoke later using Docker run. So if you run that, it'll build a test image. It'll give you more information. Then if that's fine, you can do a final build of it of Docker build. Target is, the app that you want. So that's like the image name you want, and then the tag that you want. And then at the end, there's a little dot, which is indicating the path, which is like the current working directory. So if you're successful, say writing image, naming whatever, done. That's fine. And if you want to run it, it's like we were doing before, Docker run rm, and then you just give it whatever you gave the tag as before. So you tagged it your name /app / version. You give that as the thing you want to run, and you give whatever command you want to do, and you're done. So if you had like spades, you package up spades, Docker run name /spades, tag, which is a version number, spades.py, -- help, that'll work. If you want to run, so let's say you're not quite sure if you want to run like a specific program, you want to kind of like just inspect the container, you can use -it, which is running it in interactive. So it'll create it like a shell. So it's like, imagine the system, imagine it's like a remote server and it's booted up. You've logged into it and you've got just like a shell. That's what it'll give you if you do -it. So in there, you can run the command you wanted to run, or you could run like ls, or you could run like cd or whatever, and you can actually look inside it. And that's quite useful for troubleshooting because, you might install your program and it'll complain, it'll go, oh, something can't be found, what's wrong? And you realize, oh, wait, if I work with the container interactively, I can find out, oh, I've actually put the script in the wrong directory and I can't find it. Oh, okay, I need to fix my Docker file for that. So interactive is quite nice. You can run things, actually, you can just treat it like a shell and just run stuff inside it, like as you would any other thing. So that might be nice for I don't know. I've never used it for training, but I suspect it might be nice for someone if they're training or someone or something like that. And then if you want to get out, just use exit. So how do you push the container out? So Docker push image. So it's the image name that you gave it. So the tag that you gave it before. You push the image, it pushes it to Docker Hub. So that way, in the same way that we saw the Collaborate example, you can have your own, and then your friends, you can just send that link to your friends and they can also download it. You need to first tag it. Ideally, you need to tag it in the format that Docker Hub is expecting. So, you might have called it Docker, you might have built it called like dev or fish or something. You can't call it that if you want to push it to Docker Hub. You need to retag it as something in that format where it's username /repository : with a tag or version number or something. So you do that, Docker tag. Then you need to log into Docker Hub. So Docker login, you can do that. It will either it'll just log in automatically or it'll kick you over to some web page, some URL where you'll need to like log in on the website. Once you do that once, and then it'll remember. And then you can push. So it's push username /repository tag. You can push that up. That's it. You've gone from creating it to running it to putting it up online for people to use. So that's all I had. Really, really quick. Went through everything much faster. We can have questions and so on. If you want to practice, here are some homework for you to do. Have a look at the StaffB website. It's really good. They've written a lot of containers and they have really good documentation on how this all works. Have a read of that, work through their examples, write a Python script, because it's actually quite annoying to do this like Docker run, blah, 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 like for each software. I find it very, very irritating. And usually what I do is I just write a script that just calls the Docker as the Docker container as a sub process and do my results thing and just sort of handle it through like a script. So try and do the Collaborate example as a Python script. Have a look at Singularity, particularly if you're using an HPC, and try and write a Dockerfile that takes SAM tools and compiles it from source code. I don't just use like Conda and install SAM tools. I want you to download the source code, compile it, and make the binary runnable from the Docker container. Try that out. Try and write that as a Docker file, and you can send that to me if you want some feedback. All right, so that's it. So let's open it up for questions for the next 15 minutes. I'm sure there's plenty because I went really fast. Oh, no questions. Even better.